Yesterday was the second day of our workshop, and we started off with Sir Ronald's keynote address on politicizing the Queen, where he discussed how poetry is a performance and the importance of the politics of our poetry and how it's imperative that we inscribe our identity in our poetry because there's so much to be gained from it. And then we discussed first Muriel's suite. And here we saw how the density of poetry can challenge our notions of what we can do with our own writing. And then we talked about King's poetry, where we see a variety of styles and experiences that can be seen within the LGBTQ movement. And then we ended with Alfie's suite, where we see the personal and the philosophical and the socio-political spheres of poetry coinciding in a collection.
Thank you, Nico, for that sweet and clear summary. So we go on with our business. For today, our first fellow presenting suite is Thomas. So Thomas will read 3 pieces from his collection. First.
Good morning, everybody. So my first poem that I'm going to be reading is Remembering the Farm. It's the very first poem, page 79. Remembering the Farm. Under the sunlight, you find up dried up oranges, the occasional cluster of apples, overripe pears, and all other fruits from the farm closed down years ago. You talk of the chimney, how ash used to float in columns, of grey puffs ascending, vanishing into seamless skies. I remember the wallpaper, yellow and crumbling. You talk of chipped teacups, smashed plates, and shattered glass. The last time we visited, this house was barred with a signpost. Foreclosure, it whispers, wood rotting alongside the sign's own insides. We should really call Mom and Dad, but how do we travel the distance from phone call to receiver between the first and last click? We continue forward without instructions, stepping over the remnants in place of the whole. Instead, I will point at the rusty wheelbarrow, the pitchfork by the gate. Together, we recall the fruit market. In returning to the stalls and the colors of summer harvest, we remember the fall that preludes winter. My second poem is The Orchestra of Tremors. It's on page 81. The Orchestra of Tremors. The earthquake begins suspended between plate and fault. Below us, now the incubation of disaster. When the first wave beats against boiling earth, I will scramble to find you amongst the mad rush. But when the first wall gives way, the depth of sound transforms into a realization of silence. Screaming your name is negated by the screaming of other names, of love multiplied in separation. To be rendered deep follows the pattern of searching and longing when voice refutes voice. If ever through the rubble we follow the patterns of your hand pushing through the earth, we will ponder silence. When the world pulls apart its own skin, you and I will learn the negotiations of sound. And my third poem is Departure, which is the next page. Departure. The ship departs at 2:25. If you are a minute late, the latch will slam into your face, blood and tissue a moment of contortion. If you are 2 minutes late, you will make it to the end of the steps, unable to step down before the ship separates, your longing now measured in meters. If you are 3 minutes late, the boat will already be roaring in the water, clockwork and fuel learning the sound of ignition. The tragedy becomes a story of disavowal. If you are 4 minutes late, it will already be racing around the corner. The islands learning to embrace movement, the sound of tears a reminder of drowning. If you are 5 minutes late, there will be nothing for you to see except for water smashing on land and ripples tracing imaginary wounds and cuts.
Thank you, Thomas.
morning, everyone. Well, my general comment first for the entire collection. After reading all his pieces, my first impression was it's really sad. But for me, this kind of sadness is a beautiful one, the happy kind of sadness, if that makes sense. Yung parang, yeah, it was tragic, you were not meant to be, love lost, or LQ, but at the same time, for me, it's, you're sad, but you're happy that it happened, that somehow you were able to experience those experiences. And what I like most is how Tom played with the structure of his poems, especially those 3 poems that talked about ships, water, boat, departure, story of a boat, and the last one. So I think it's very playful and visual at the same time. If sa departure, naisip ko lang, what if baliktarin natin yung time? You start with if you are 5 minutes late and then you go down to if you are 1 minute late. I think for me, it will be more effective if you end with the lash will slam into your face. Parang for me, mas more impactful kung 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 minute late yung pagkakabo. And I also like how you played with sounds and silence in your poetry. So yun, nadama ko siya habang binabasa. That's it. Thank you.
So first of all, I think that what's good is you have this meditative tone, which I think is consistent within the suite. So I think it's important that the poet does have that because it becomes kind of like a brand, but like something that people can recognize you, right? And aside from that, there's also a concern with the tropical images and the island images. So I think you created for yourself. I think it's clear to you the ambition of the suite. I think just one of the main things that you have to look out for is some polysyllabic words appear in the poem, and sometimes they stick out to me because the rest of the poem is so silent and hushed that when it appears, it drags down the pacing. I think the relatively shorter poems. For example, in An Orchestra of Country Ghosts, you have cacophony of lullabies desecrating terracing elegies, which there can be music to that, but I think they're just densely found because they're so near each other as well. In Departure, I really like the escalation of how each stanza builds on the intensity of the previous one, and you see really there the movement of the poem also as well. So, for example, also like in recognition of urgencies, you say futility of illumination, which to me sounds like you complicated something that could be said more simply. I feel like. And then in Story of a Boat also, I think you just have to watch out because I noticed that there are so many negatory adjectives like in the middle lines you have unnameable, uncharted, indeterminable, unmarked, and all very close to one another as well. Yeah. So I think that's the only lookout for you, I think, because there's already a very good tone to it, and the images you already know what beautiful images to work with. So that's the thing that I would just look out for. Thank you.
Hello po. So, good morning. Hi, Rooney. I guess I'd like to just echo Nico's comment as well, in the sense that there were a lot of words, a lot of moments that weakened the piece for me or distracted me from fully experiencing the hushness, the mutedness of the voice, of the tone. And also, I felt a bit disoriented as well with, for example, in Remembering the Farm. It doesn't feel like a Philippine farm for me, so I was thinking like, where was this? In other poems, I wasn't able to have a clue of where am I. Maybe these are separate places. But Remembering the Farm truly did not feel like a farm from Surigao or farm from the Philippines for me. So with the notion of pears, apples, oranges, and teacups, so it felt quite Western. So it made me think, or in wheelbarrow, like where was this? Where was I? And the summer and the fall. So it didn't feel very Filipino for me. So I was wondering, yun nga, like, asan nga ba ito nagaganap? Maybe it's not here. Maybe it's somewhere internal. Maybe somewhere else. Also, with regards to the, I think I also am looking for more rootedness and groundedness in terms of imagery. Like, for example, I've read a lot of Visayan and Cebuano poems dealing a lot with water, with bodies of water, and so perhaps I was a bit into seeing what is the difference between your storms here, with the waters that you're including here, with the waves, with the ships. It didn't give me that sense of anchorage of place or anchorage in terms of situation or cultural background, perhaps. But I really also do like how the poems are short and they're easy to swallow. They can be digested easily. I can immerse myself in them. So it's something like a breath of fresh air. So, which I like, and it's very refreshing in the sense of how there are a lot of nature and a lot of light involved. Also, not only with the language, but I guess there were certain repetitions. You have a tendency for repetitions that, for me, sometimes it doesn't add something to the plate. Well, this is just me, but I think, for example, in the Acapit's memoir, in the last part, the splash, 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 then, so there's a certain dramatic thing going on there. But for me, the splash, splash, parang, it didn't give me a really good or poetic experience in my mind. It's just splash, splash, and other parts as well, there were repetitions that I felt weren't building up with the piece. And I guess, yeah, that's it for me.
Before anything else, I'd like to commend the writer for the language and the tone, for creating something, a sound that's very distinct, that no matter what piece of his we read, it all rings the same to some extent. Like, I know who the writer is, that this is written by the same person. My general appreciation of this read is that it's sort of this measurement of the warmth and the coldness of the universe through employing space, because of the recurrence of houses, the recurrence of space, like as in like the farm, the house that's newly built, the house that was foreclosed, the earth that's breaking it, that's tearing its skin apart. But at the same time, I would like to echo Mariel that it doesn't have a very distinct sense of place, in that it doesn't allow me to imagine exactly where I am in how it describes that particular space. So I guess the only thing I could suggest is to more vividly, I don't know, employ local colors, I guess, or depends on kung nasa Europa ka naman, then employ Western colors, I guess. But then also a bit of suggestion, kasi for example, I feel like the writing can sometimes over-explain, Like, one of my favorite lines in For Sale, A House Newly Built, is also the one line that I have some issue with, which is, we say love is built like a house, but a house demands bricks and sweat, where love demands nothingness and establishes itself even in lacking. I prefer for it to have ended with just nothingness, because the following line merely reaffirms what the previous line already stated adequately. So I didn't feel like it had any added value to the poetic aesthetic, I guess, of the piece. But other than that, I thoroughly enjoyed the suite. It had a lovely tone, and it was beautifully written.
Hi, PD or Tom, good morning. Good morning, everyone. The very first impression that you see his name printed as well on the manuscript, on the suite, is that it gives it colonial flair. It has the Shaw last name, and that sort of, I think, again, it's the author and then the text, it's again another discourse, but it provides you that sort of context that, hey, I'm expecting something kind of not local, which is what he served me, what he served us at this point. So he's looking at memory as muse, no? The importance of memory at a young age of 19 sort of provides him enough material for details to provide us that these memories are not so distant. It's not about his childhood, it's about his kind of a very malapit na scenario. So I noticed that across all of the poems, there's this recurring element of sound as medium. Splash, phone call, orchestra, cacophony, voice. But I was looking for more onomatopoeia, since it seems that the sound is the most important element in most of his suites. Also on topography, see Barth mentioned something on toponymy and memory. He said that a certain description, a certain name of a locality will provide you two things: essence of that locality, and number two, the idea that you might want to dig deeper into that locality. So I think most of all the suites that, or the poems that I've read here, my favorite is the Orchestra of Tremors. Number one, because it's relatable at an LGBTQ level. And Marvin was arguing with me kanina sa room because wala pa siyang nakikitang LGBTQ flair. Sabi ko, hindi naman. I think I saw something sa Orchestra of Tremors in terms of awakenings and the tectonic plate, mga ganung continental drift theory. So I think it has a certain air of tremor that is prevalent among queer texts. So I guess that's all for me.
Hi Tom. For the entire collection, my only remark here is, as I was reading all 8 pieces of them, it was like looking at a photo album which was stolen from Hogwarts, where the pictures are all moving, but they do not stay inside the frame. It's like they all left. So it's also a meditation on memory and time. I like how time plays an important role in all the pieces here. My favorites here are the first 2 poems, Remembering the Form. I noted here this is as though a short study on abandonment and neglect. And the thing about memory is its property of being fleeting and fragmented, that it doesn't answer the question, so what, as much as it needs to. But if we look closely at each stanza, I still think the author to probably answer a question, so what? What does this make sense of in the entirety of the poem? With memories, kasi it's sort of a tricky thing, kasi it's fragmented and it doesn't really stay in place. And ang hirap sa pagsusulat about memory is you have to stretch it in a way na dapat may consistency. And so, ang alala ko, the advice that my psychology professor taught me before was to fictionalize some parts of a poem if it is based especially on a word. I find na this is a good opening dahil dun sa word na ash, it refers tong word na to dun sa following poem na parang the second poem is the remains of the remains na nandun sa unang tula. And itong line sa third stanza, the wallpaper yellow and crumbling, I feel like this is a reference to the yellow wallpaper ni Christine, I don't remember the author, pero something like that na, a short story about physical and mental health being, going, spiraling downwards. And parang mas na-emphasize pa yun sa sumunod na second line sa chipped teacups, smashed plates, and shattered glass. In an orchestral country ghosts, I like how it used two parts. Now, those written within and outside the parentheses. Kasi usually, a parentheses is not considered in common language kapag i-speech in a paragraph form. Pero it holds something dear here that it intends to exist. However, it is not so much as mentioned in waking life. Pretty much a resemblance sa experiment sa sinusunod ni E. Cummings when he comes to use parentheses. Also, departure and the story of the book. I like the motion of the poem, how they present themselves on the page. Departure, I see here the preciseness of time. Na parang if you go 1 minute late, this is what is likely to happen. And okay na nandun na nakafix siya sa ganung situation or predicament yung voice na nandito. Kasi this is what is exactly about to happen. Kasi ang isang issue sa time, it's multifaceted. There are a lot of possibilities to happen. And maigi na yung nakafocus ka sa isang situation para alam namin where you're going with this. And much like in the story of the boat, I like how it is shaped. For me, like a boat with a sail. And when you read it, the motion of it is like swaying forwards and backwards. I can picture myself in the seasickness of the feeling of being seasick in that. And lastly, a remark on the captain's memoir. The first and the third and fourth stanzas, it seems na parang lost yung voice ng poem na to dun sa tula dahil sa white space. Parang siya, he's just drifting from reality. And he becomes structured dun sa second poem when he reminisces on these times. So, that's it for my report.
Good morning. Tom, a question of memory as a street is a good alignment of identity. I think everything must begin in self, in the core, and it matters in the writing or in this collection of Shaw or Tom. What I find a little problematic is yung organic unity pa din. I was looking for, let's make it more local, yung mga roots na ginamit. Para mas magmukhang although I understand the truth that you have bloods from different pero I still would want to consider, halimbawa, I was asking myself, do we see chimneys in every household? If it's written in a Philippine context. Parang ganun. I was asking myself that question. Do we see apples? Do we see oranges in the Philippines? I was asking that to myself. Parang ganun. Okay. And I think I also saw lacking in action. I see a lot of description or a lot of adjectives in poems. Pero in the 16 lines, in the 16 poems, I'm not seeing action, but the forms are moving. So that's what impressed me a lot. yeah, I liked also the longing, the memories and all. And yeah, doon sa ano sa parts of departure, um, there are no punctuation marks, which can mean to my reading, can mean the continuity of the persona's waiting, though he was talking about being late in the entirety of the poem and being time conscious. That's how I understood it. And yeah, I think yeah, kanina I was asking my roommate about the LGBT color to it. But then I read through it and I understood the truth that there is, and I like to commend the writer for that. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Major observation na. Ay, tama. Major observation. Major observation ko lang sa suite mo. It really plays with the place kasi parang the first two poems are about the farm, which kaya nga parang really western kasi yung vibe niya. And then the next poems are about the sea, and then we have about the house, and then we have the dramatic ending, the captain's memoir, as the last poem of the suite. Pero as a reader, I think na parang ang hirap mag-catch up sa like farm setting, sea setting, and then houses, and then dramatic ending. Kasi parang hindi smooth yung transition from the places or the setting of the poems. So parang ang hirap lang mag-catch up as a reader kasi parang hindi smooth yung feeling ko through reading the whole suite. Kasi binasa ko siya more as an entire work rather than like individual pieces. So yun lang.
Hi, Tom. I think it's been mentioned already that the tone of the collection is quite consistent, and it's one of the most sort of easily noticed features of it. And maybe we should sort of describe the tone a little better or a little more so that we'll understand what we're talking about. There's a certain calmness and a certain tranquility to the whole collection. And yet it's actually talking about things that are not necessarily calm or tranquil, like earthquakes and rainstorms and even love that didn't quite come true. The promise of love not coming true. These are tumultuous things, and yet the attitude taken is one of composure and calm. That's already a remarkable artistic sort of obviously decision that was made by Tom, not to actually be hysterical, to actually adopt this sort of very calm attitude talking about these things. Another feature that sort of runs through the whole collection is the way it feels like it's a lover's discourse. There's a lover, there's an I speaking, and there's a you. There is the first poem where the you is actually a sibling. But there's something like that, right? Where dad and mom and things like that. But the other ones, it's really a more romantic sort of you, in the sense that the you is beloved, and the speaker is the one speaking about the love, rather than, and the beloved really has no dialogue, nothing to say. In the Lover's Discourse by Roland Barthes, we understand that it's the lover who speaks, not the beloved. It's the lover who has the discourse. And what is interesting about any kind of lover's discourse is that the ultimate beloved is the self itself. So it's almost like a closed circuit. You don't really get to the beloved. You only actually, it's very self-referential. You actually just confront, in the end, yourself. The reason for that is that the beloved is really actually too different from the self. That any beloved we have is really just our fantasy of who that you is.
I'm sorry, we never get to the real you. The you is too different to even be recognizable. So the person we fall in love with is really a fantasy. And I think marriages fail because in the end, the two people married wake up one morning and realize that they cannot sustain the fantasy anymore, right? And so the relationship ends. There is that thing here of how things are being remembered, and the relationship, in fact, is over. And there's that sadness, that wistfulness or mournfulness running through the whole collection. And I think it's a strength that that Tom has actually just decided to sort of not render things in the present, but to be in the present and to remember, right? I was going to say that what's queer about it is its understatement. You know, of course, we have seen queer being sort of, the sensibility of queerness being equated with camp and being over the top and being excessive and hyperbolic, which we arguably could be an entry point to thinking of queerness in Marielle's collection. It's excessiveness. But probably the opposite is also, we can make a case for the opposite, right? Which is that understatement can be a queer stance as well, in the sense that it is, in fact, one way of confronting, you know, and it's a bit of a compromise in a way, but it is, in fact, the artistic way, right? Poetry does not say, it says, right? It's indirect expression, it's not direct. I mean, why use a metaphor if you can just go straight to the point? It's because a metaphor is sometimes a better way to actually arrive at the truth, right? So you have these different sort of devices and maybe tropes being used. You have farmhouse, you have the house, the domicile as a metaphor. You have weather as a metaphor. You have music as a metaphor, orchestra, and water also. They all create what we might sort of generalize as an atmospheric effect. The whole collection is very atmospheric. It has atmospherics, you know. The subtlety of all of that, the understatement of all of that. So you let the landscape or the waterscape mirror what's going on inside the speaker. The speaker will not actually divulge what he really feels, but the landscape will sort of articulate that feeling for him. That is an artistic decision, you know, and I think it's sustained throughout the collection. What may be the problem for me is that, you know, poetry is a paradoxical union of form and content. You know that, right? That in fact, in art, well, not just poetry, form is realized content. Okay, the distinction dissolves in the end, because in the end, form and content paradoxically are one. But if you have to sort of like piece the elements of the form, then you are really left only with three: story, image, and sound. Those are the elements we work with in poetry. Sound is something we appreciated a lot of in Marielle's collection. A lot of the musicality of it, a lot of the alliteration taking place. So she made full use of that. We were sort of a little wandering, we were a little lost as far as the story is concerned. The imagery was also, there was an embarrassment of riches in that, and so that also will need some sort of like revision in that regard. But here I think we have the sound, it's the calm sort of sound that Tom has chosen, but the understatement that Tom has sort of decided to be the main sort of like approach, actually the story is lacking. And I think that's because the understatement may be a little too much. You know, poetry, according to Marianne Moore, is imaginary gardens with real toads, right? We don't have enough toads, right? The garden is nice and wistful and metaphorically, you know, wonderfully figured into being. You have the atmospherics, you have the space and all of that, but we don't have enough real things in them. The abstractions, elegies, cacophonies, things like that, they're not specific enough. And maybe, Tom, it's possible, and you ask yourself, is the non-specificity, which is the enemy of art, the universal, which we all aspire to reach, has to be reached through the particular. Right? We look for that. We call it rootedness, we call it groundedness, we call it particularity, is that possibly a queer? Can that actually be appreciated as part of the queer grounding of the collection? Are you trying to protect certain things, like not naming people, not being too specific? They might be able to identify themselves. Here, the beloved is almost like an apparition, right? He doesn't become real. He is too understated. And the reason for that is again, because precisely we are in the Philippines, it's going to be hard to be too specific, right? I remember when I was in UST, a college student, do you remember First Lad? It has a story, a very memorable story called, what's that story of Red ang Luha ni Michael, right? Red ang Luha ni Michael. It's a speculative piece of speculative fiction where the speaker is an interior decorator who's a little sort of bonkers, and he and his partner, who's a man, so it's a gay relationship. Their relationship is on the rocks, and he gets sort of like fired from his latest job at the CCP, ends up being just in the house a lot, and then he has this sort of something occurs to him. He has to paint the house red, so he paints everything red. Even the refrigerator, and then the mailman, and then the postman comes knocking on the door, and he even paints the postman's nose red. The whole place turns red. And then when the partner arrives, right, he gives up. It's like, and then the very last drop of paint in his bucket, he paints the tear of his partner red. Okay, in that version, the names are already Michael and Jake. But when it came out in UST Varsitarian, the very same school, which now has this consent form, he was my friend, Jimmy Alcantara, who's my batchmate. He was writing for the Varsitarian. He was just the literary editor. He just called them Mel and something unisex. So that was a strategy, to understate, not specify. There is a queer reason for that, right? You're trying to get it published in the Royal and Pontifical University of Santo Tomas, right? And he did that several times. He had a column, a literary column. He was the literary editor. And he kept talking about cruising and things like that, except things were so vague and non-specific that if you didn't really know what he was talking about, then you would actually, like this clueless priest, were probably not even aware. The title of his column was Magkakahoy, which means woodsman or something like that, right? But we understood that, talking to him. It's really parang it's the bakla who's gathering fuel, like wood, right? By going to these movie houses and sort of, kayang understanding of it. So very queer idea of like basically sapping the strength from men and gathering their fuel. Okay, magkakahoy siya. Okay, something like that. A metaphor, in other words. No? So yes, probably sometime in the future when things are better in the home front, right, and you can be a little more specific. The revision may be in trying to sort of tone down the understatement, and you won't lose your general subtlety anyway, because it's clearly your sensibility tone. You must be a very nice lover. You're very tender and gentle. Okay, but imagine that it's not you. Probably you're the opposite of this. This is your ideal self, because you're actually pretty hysterical, right? But maybe in the revision, you could actually give your reader now and then something nice to nibble on, like something specific, like a name. Yeah. But I think it easily also expresses, I think, your concern for the environment. I'm thinking of Siargao, and we were talking about how tourism is despoiling the island, right? And you love your island, you love your home. And you see it here, trying to sort of capture the beauty of nature, right? But there's this sort of impending sort of danger. Also, nature is not necessarily secure, right? My favorite poem of yours would be An Orchestra of Country Ghosts, I think, because there is definitely that love-making allusion there. So I was thinking, at last, the queer thing, we made love in your tin-roofed room, okay? What's nice about it is that it's being remembered, and then the decision of the speaker is he will not. Remember, and then this relationship will necessarily succeed, but he will not stop remembering in the end. He will still more or less wallow in the loss, no? Which, meaning kind of play around with the ghost. You know, now and then, right? I think when a love ends, we call it there's a ghost left behind, right? That song by Indigo Girls, no? In Love with Your Ghost, okay, which is a love song. But you decide to keep the ghost rather than disown the ghost, no? And it's probably the decision you take as far as the love story goes. That the love story is over, but the ghost of it is something you want to keep around you and you don't want to lose. Maybe you're young, you will need to move on sometime. You will need to fall in love again and gather in the end this whole harem of ghosts. Like, because in the end, sabi nga ni Ronald, nothing lasts. And so you're gonna end up with a house full of ghosts. I'm kidding. That's not necessarily going to be your fate because you're a kind, sort of gentle person. Unlike Ronald, who basically drove all the lovers bonkers, ran away screaming. Okay, and then I also like A House Really Built, precisely because of this line. I will remember the dreams we pulled out of thin air on a premise of nothing, you offered everything. I'm sorry, that's your drama queen moment. Na parang very restrained, but then there, I thought, oh my God, like let it go at last. On the premise of nothing, or offer the everything. And that's love, isn't it? That's love. If there is something involved on the premise of something, there's something utilitarian. But love is actually the opposite of utility. Right? There's no real reason for the beloved to deserve the love. If there is a reason for that, then it's not love. So the beloved has to be somewhat unworthy for the whole thing to be love. Okay? Yeah. Diba? Kasi kung he earned the right for you to love him, that's not love. Love is unearned, it has to be. Okay? So, maganda yun. Okay? So you're wise beyond your years, Dawn. Why? How? Trying to put my finger down, pin down the queerness of it. I realize it's that, no? It's in the understatement, and there's a reason for it, no? For young writers who are talking about love and trying to sort of perform themselves in their art. You perform yourself in your art. This is still the moment of hesitation, and you understand why the understatement is there. And so I urge you to keep doing this, and the understatement will slowly give way to theatrics and performances and things like that. No? You will probably move on to another sort of tone or another voice, But I am entirely sort of pleased with the way you're starting. Okay. And you said last time when we were talking while we were sitting wine that you don't really do fiction. But I think because that's what's lacking here, the storyness of it, maybe you should try to do a little more fiction. Because, all the elements of fiction are poetry, right? There's a point of view, you choose that. There are characters. The dialogue is actually not necessary because the whole poem is already a monologue, right? Someone talking. You can also think of poetry as drama, because there's a character in a scene, right? So there, Tom, congratulations. I am entirely sort of confident that you'll be able to sort of flesh out a collection, which will be your first collection of these very tender lyrics, that are mostly love poems. We all start with love poetry, don't we? in queer art. We begin with that, trying to sort of, I suppose, address the question of desire, the beloved, things like that. So yeah. Next.
Hi, good morning everyone. After listening to Neil this morning, hindi ko alam kung mali-depress ako o hindi. No? But as a gay writer, as a gay person, I've been hanging on to his words ever since. So, may tingnan ko siya ng live, parang strange yung feeling. No? Anyway, sa points ni TD, no? Yung tone, no, as pointed out, no, especially by Steno, no, a while ago, about the sadness, no, but there's happiness, no, the happiness. The ancient Japanese aesthetics, no, there's they call it mono no aware, the sadness in things. No? For the ancient Japanese poets, no, they believe that for something to be truly beautiful is sad at the same time, no, because of its impermanence. So, and I can see that sensibility in this collection by TD, no. And then, I think we should not be bothered with Western images or things in the poem, no. Like for example, if we're looking for the local color, I think the apples, oranges, no, are local enough, no, local in the context of the poem. Because I think we should also stop thinking about the Philippines as limited only to the Philippine archipelago. No? Now that we have like 10% of Filipinos are abroad, no? and there are many Filipinos living in temperate countries, no? in Europe and in America, and of course knowing that it is also half, no? You're half British and half Filipino. So we should not be bothered, no, by his poem invoking or using images that's having to do with this very Western. No? So because if we do that, no, if we think of local color as only Siargao, no, or it will be very limiting, no, and the danger of that is we can be essentialist, no, and nativist, no. So I think we should start embracing now literal works by Filipino writers, no, from all over the world. So when we even if I myself, even if I'm writing in Kinaraya, no, I do not only think of Antique, no, or Panay, no, but I also embrace my being a teacher in Metro Manila, no, and now that I have a sister, no, and a niece living in Europe, so my world has expanded, no, as a writer. No? So my favorite poem in the collection is Remembering the Farm. Because among all the poems, ito yung poem na may strong narrative structure, no? So, and very clear, no? To me, it's very clear, no? Unlike other poems na even the story of a boat and departure, no? I cannot pinpoint what's the local, no? So, although I'm thinking of Siargao, but it doesn't sound like Siargao, no? Maybe it's a big lake in UK, no? But then, no, we get to point it out, no? Because it's a clear na may maraming tinatago, no? So, and maybe we should accept that as part of the clearness, no, of the word. So anyway, speaking of a strong narrative structure, yung pagtingnan natin, parang short story siya, Remembering the Farm. No? So the first and second stanzas, no? So talagang sinisetting yung setting, no? That's why gusto ko yung under the sunlight, you find dried up oranges, the cluster of apples, overripe pears, and other fruits, no, from the farm closed down years ago. So nasa setting na talaga tayo, no? And then the third stanza, tension or conflict is being introduced. No? So now, sabi niya, I remember the wallpaper yellow and crumbling, the top of cheap teacups, smashed plates, and shattered glass. And so something happened in the past, no? in this farm. No? And then, fourth stanza, the last time we visited this house, no? So the story is pushing forward. And then, I like the details in the fifth stanza. Now, we should really call mom and dad, but how we travel the distance from phone call to receiver between the first and the last click. So because here, in this part of the poem, parang i-clear sa akin nagsasalita, no? So these are siblings talking about the past, so maybe about their farm, no? So, and then that attempt to call mom and dad is an attempt to recover what was lost. Maybe it's about the broken family, as represented by that farm crumbling and rotting. So we continue the sixth stanza. We continue forward without instructions, stepping over the remnants in a place of the whole. It's an attempt again to come back to an old farm, but then it's just a physical going back, but you can never come back or come home to that farm. And then the seventh stanza, instead I will point at the dusty wheelbarrow, the pitchfork with the gate together, we recall the fruit market. So here there's an acceptance, that there are many things in the past that belong only to memory. And then the last stanza, returning to the stalls in the colors of summer harvest, we remember the fall that produces winter. And here there's an acceptance. And the effect is so calming. I know that is something terrible about broken home, talking about broken home, talking about losing a farm, which is part of the persona's childhood. But they can't recover it anymore. And I think the hope is in the acceptance, represented by the stalls in the fruit market. So, sa farm nila, so makita mo talaga yung technique of storytelling kasi sa first stanza, it began with rotten fruits and then ito sa market na. So, and that market is of course very different from the farm of long ago, but it would, there are fresh fruits in the market, and it seems like it's hope and acceptance. So, sana nilito ka-clear yung ibang poem, that, even if I don't know the particular place in UK, but very clear yung setting sa akin, so yung sense of place, So, sana may ganun ding ang ibang tula, which I think yun yung sinabi ni Neil kanina, that it should be clarified. So, thank you.
Thank you. So this is a question of memory, and I think before I begin, I'm wondering about. I'm really curious about writing on a tangent, right? Like if you write on this tangent, can writing on a tangent be queer? And can it be claimed as queer even in cisgen texts, right? So this place of the arc of naming, unnaming, renaming, speaking, unspeaking, that kind of thing, parang more than just understatement. To understate, that's a literary device. But what Neil had pointed out about the things we cannot name, right? Or the things that we rename and in a sequence will reveal somehow. That sounds. I think we can claim that as something queer, even if it happens in cisgender texts, right? It's just out there. I'm hoping for your opinions about that, because anyway, in this workshop, we are learning as we go along about how forms can be queer, and the different gestures that we make as queer, right? LGBTQ in our poetry. So I think it's nice to note that, considering this is an example of this kind of, at least an attempt at a tangent, but it's not fully realized. So, okay. Um, so all of these poems, I can see, are a navigation and a negotiation between. Actually, that seems to be the favorite word. Somehow between. And you can see a persona between two things. For example, in Remembering the Farm, that's literally in the poem, between the first and the last click, right? So that's Remembering the Farm. An orchestra of country goes, it's between a you and an I / me, so it's a secret, right? There's the orchestra of tremors, between plate and fault, right? Which is earthquake. Then you have departure, between time and space, and between water and land. Story of a boat, between sea and sun. Recognition of urgencies, between, again, a you and an I, right? And every time that happens, there seems to be a secret. Diba? So this is where that happens. And for sale, a newly house built between house and body. And in the poem, this beautiful, tender, where is it? Yeah, that line was already mentioned. We say love is built like a house, but the house demands bricks and sweat. Where is that? Oh, no. I don't think it's in this book. Where is that? Against the Post. Which poem has that, Against the Post?
Here, same poem. 1, 2, 3, stanza.
I can't see it.
For sale, a house. Fifth
Yeah.
stanza.
Fifth stanza. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Ayan, there. I love that line. This house was built on empty land, you holding me against the post of the fence, telling me of our imaginary children. You can feel that between house and body right there. And the last one, a captain's memoir, between absent ship and ocean. So there's always this between and this negotiation between. So I also noticed in this collection something that I also do in my own work, a gesture in poetry, right? So there's, when the persona gestures, like in Remembering the Farm, instead I will point at the rusty wheelbarrow and the pitchfork by the gate. Together we recall the fruit market. So when the poet directs the attention towards something, and this is not necessarily metaphor. So there is an action, and that gesture is actually a very beautiful layer. And I was wondering, for example, in this poem, if it's a homage to the red wheelbarrow, like the other wheelbarrow. But yeah, but Remembering the Farm is my favorite poem. Also because of, the choice of objects installed within it. And there's another poem with another gesture. An orchestra of country goes. I will not turn on the radio. So the denial of the gesture is important. Right? But I'm pointing out the gestures because I would like the author to be able to explain why these gestures are there or why you're gesturing. I will not turn on the radio because static points towards disconnect, and this time I will not bury your longing. So there's the I will not, right? So there's the withholding of the gesture. Then there's another one, the orchestra of tremors. I will scramble to find you amongst the mad rush. Diba? So, scrambling, that's an action. Right? Kasi majority of the poems that I see, there are only few with actions. Mostly the poet stares, ruminates. Pero the poet persona doesn't create an action. So I noticed here mostly that there are actions. There's another. Departure is form as gesture, right? So the form of the poem is mimicking steps, right? About being late. So, you know, and then the staggering has that kind of anxiety. Although I think this should be extended for more anxiety, more staggering. And so 1, 2, 3, 4. The quatrain, what are you going to do with it? Right? Story of a boat. It's also form as gesture and it's performing shifts. I also hope that you expand this. Maganda yung ano. Kasi when you do the entire form thing, especially experimental form, it's great if you can engage the reader in that kind of energy. Kasi like when you break form like this, or when form is evident, it's really nice to push the reader into it, diba? To actually create a visceral reaction in the reader because of its duration. Then recognition of urgencies. There's gesture again. Tomorrow we will pick up what has fallen outside of our home. Why? Well, what's this going, like, pick up? You will linger by the door while I learn to scavenge between the uprooted trees. There you go. That's it. And with the splash, 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 I like that. Actually, I like that. Ayun na naman, Basho's Pond, diba? And how can you play with this more? How can you cause more tensions? Can you create interstices? Kasi look at, if it's a captain's memoir, are there certain things that you can do? Kasi like the spacing here, is there an erasure? Parang ganun eh. Kasi when you do this entire form thing, you have that performance going on. So, parang how else can you play with it? Diba? How else can we play with it? I also noticed with this poet, so this is not like, you know, parang good comment, bad comment thing, but the poems are set in the beginning for every single one. Diba? The setting is in the beginning. Under the sunlight, you find dried oranges. Oh. Next, I felt you down there, clawing up, screaming about into me. The next, the earthquake begins, suspended. Diba? So, yung premise nandyan na. The ship departs at 2:25. The sea rippled underneath the sun. So you're doing the setting thing. These are 8 poems, and they all begin with the setting. If you can break it up, diba? Start somewhere else. Aside from a setting of either a premise, an idea, a concept, most of this is atmosphere. You're setting the scene. So I'm not sure. Parang it's either you sustain it all the way through your entire book manuscript kasi may purpose siya, di ba? Kasi if you can notice it in 8 poems, parang it might mean something. Parang kasi like true north or whatever, di ba? Parang or because there is so much water here. Of course I love water. Is the poem a boat? Diba? How can you use the, kasi you're using formula. Can the poem be a boat? And what should it contain? It does feel like a boat kasi parang may prow siya, may rudder sa likod. Because you set the scene and you give directions at the end of your poems. Right? So there, thank you.
I enjoyed reading this collection tremendously, right? Very clear, but I like the tone of the collection because despite the loss, we are ennobled as lovers. Okay, we are ennobled by the love. We willfully and sometimes recklessly offer the bastard
Okay? The beloved. At any rate, this poetry collection is suffused with nostalgia, right? What is nostalgia? Diba? Return, the longing for return, return home. But nostalgia demands, and nostalgia, of course, demands repetition, which you will see, which is evident, all throughout the collection. Nostalgia demands music. Nostalgia demands form, right? And nostalgia demands control. Okay? I found them, evident in the collection, but there are some. I have some suggestions to the poet, because particularly on matters related to form and control. Okay, for instance, I agree with Dr. John. Remembering the Farm is the most fully realized poem here. Why? Because it has enough, the story is there, right? Very clearly stated. There's understatement. Okay, I like the ending. Remember the fall that eludes the winter. While he has already pointed out that there's acceptance. Okay, kasi nag-change na from the dried up oranges to now you have the fruits again in the market. I like the fact that it ends with winter, which is a recognition of the disaster, of the doom that will befall, that will come, but it's that kind of control is not quite evident in the other poems. For instance, in an orchestra of Country Ghost, I feel that sometimes the writer tends to tends to lose control. Parang there are lines that need pruning, for instance. Ash clouds smoking your words, fine. A cacophony of lullabies desecrating tiresome lullabies. Masakit sa ulo yun, too many, parang wala na akong,
Too many abstractions.
Yes. I need something to lay my hands on as a reader. Diba? Particularly when you are talking about home. Nostalgia is rooted on the concept of home, grounding, and that's something that's not here. I like the Orchestra of Tremors. There is a wonderful haiku, by Raphael. I forgot his name. I'm so old. But it's basically about between the blah 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 and the wall, a hand stops the pain. Parang ganyan. I'll show you I look for it, ganun, yun kasi, yung technique niya, siyempre, haiku yun so subtle, understated, one image, position. Ito, after the second stanza, I felt that, the poem, lost me, because I no longer, I was, driven out of the poem, because there are no more details that I can see, smell, touch. I want to be there. Clattering against that boy, I think I will scramble to find your mouth and I'll rush. But later on, puro na lang depth of sound. We'll ponder silence, negotiation of sound. So that's a bit overkill, right? When I think that these sections or stanzas rather are opportunities for the poet to prepare me for the negotiations with or of sound at the end. Get me? So too much abstraction, too much telling, but not much sensory detail. Not too many sensory, not enough rather sensory details to take me there. So at the end of it all, I've lost. I can no longer feel the tremors. Parang ganun yung nangyari, parang nawala ako. Pero ang ganda-ganda ng concept kasi di ba, ano bang mangyayari pag mag-earthquake, mag-end ang world? Ano gagawin mo? Di ba? Siyempre, you will try, don't you want to die with the one you love? Or something like that? Di ba? Or something mga ganun yung mga mortality, death, all these things, Now, in departure, again, the sound of tears, a reminder of drown. interesting yung form niya. This is another admirable thing about the poet. No, the poems morph. No, Protean. No, so he has ability to handle a variety of forms. In this poem, in this collection rather, some poems acquire concreteness. No, parang he dabbles on, or rather explores, parang sanay concrete poetry, parang ganyan, di ba? Yung departure, story of boat, which looks like, which reminds me of the Supercat, no? Yung mga ganung mga boats in terms of form, no? Parang ganon. But I would like to remind the poet to be more careful, no? Kasi if you say to yourself that I want this kind of shape for my poem, then you had better execute it, quite well until the very last detail. Let me start an example, no? So, yung for sale, a house newly built. It's consistent in terms of stanza structure, 4 lines, but one stanza stands out. They're set, no? The 3 lines. This house is built on an empty land. Okay. What is it because the most important lines are here? The imaginary children, which makes it really queer. Diba? This is so beautiful, diba? You promised me nothing, and then but imaginary children because LGBTs normally, I mean not normally, okay, gay men tend to not have kids, right? So ang ganda-ganda na, I love that detail. So is it the reason why this tercet was written in a tercet? Pero ang feeling ko hindi, no? Parang bakit stick out siya, no? Kasi is it enough reason, no? Yung idea.
So erotic, right?
Yeah. Pero masakit.
Still erotic.
Yes. Sa bagay nga naman, pain and right? So, yun parang feeling ko dapat to, kasi suggestion ko lang, no? Baka he or she might want to reconsider, no? The stanza. Kasi, masisira ba yung tula? Will the poem collapse? Okay? If the poet chooses a quatrain for this particular stanza, which sticks out like a sore thumb, no? And then, okay, may excess nga, sabi ko na, by excess I mean, not in a good way, but meaning unnecessary. For instance, in the still nights, the sound of the door hinge winding back on itself echoes through. Again, no, a barrage of sounds. Sound, echo, hinge winding. Wouldn't the door hinge winding be enough? I mean, there has to be a little bit more of control, no, in the echoing. May sound pa, parang over, no. Next, I am not so sure about this last line for departure. Okay, and ripples tracing imaginary wounds and cuts. Isn't a wound a cut already, or something, or I don't know. Parang isn't it a bit over? Diba? Imaginary wounds, ang ganda lang, diba? I mean, sometimes adding more, yung problema, when you add another word to explain a previously rehearsed idea, then something gets lost along the way. Okay, what else? Yung A Captain's Memoir. Okay, I like the play, no, with form here. There's definitely daring in this poem. Nothing but ocean, and as you can see, ocean. The only things that actually are fixed, okay, or visually, I don't know what the term is, aligned rather, are ocean and home, which I think is an important decision and a good decision, okay, made by the poets. Yan lang naman ang lahat talaga sumasabog, di ba? Because that's not your name. That for me works. But this block, in the second stanza, for me needs rethinking. I agree with the choice, okay, of blocking it. Parang full block, no? Or parang block quote lang sa research, no? But I want more urgency. I want the thoughts. I want the block, no? Kasi to capture whatever is happening. Ang idea ko dito kasi is that, you know, the thoughts are running through the captain's head so fast, one after the other. Parang simultaneous lahat, but I don't see that much in terms of the word choices. So baka pwedeng pang i-explore, no? Yun. And then the splash, I'm not so sure about that, no? The time we learn only, hindi ba time we learn only? I'm not, again, is it only learn or learn only? Splash, how many splashes are there? No? Hindi ako sure, no? But yes, madam. Kaya na sa iyan. Okay, sa iyan. Gusto mo ng ganyang splash. Expand. Okay, sige. Pero sabi ko hindi ako sure. Ikaw sure, no? Okay yan. Go. But I like the then. Because gusto ko yun. I like the then. I mean, no matter how many splashes you put there, go. No? But I like the then. Okay, that's for me. So, dalawa gusto ko dito, yung ocean home. Yun lang naman ang ano and then, at the end. I see a great future, no, for this poet. May control, may tone, you know, there's nostalgia, but there's wisdom, alright? I don't care if, I'm not imagining him to be a good lover, I don't care. Right? Okay? Anyway, whether good or bad, things will end. Okay? But, you know, yeah, syempre, candida, Paula, wala namang, diba? But, you know, I'm so happy to have read this collection, you know, parang, and I wish, you know, I look forward, you know, to more poems, you know, from Mr. Shaw.
We have 5 minutes na lang.
5 more minutes. Last bit na lang, because remembering the form is a story of a family that's no longer sort of happy because the parents have separated, and this is it's, I think, probably what sort of set the template for the attitude that the persona has adopted towards love itself. So if you see love not lasting, but then what's good about it is that there is still this reluctance to let go of the beloved, even if we also know that that happened to him too. So the parents parted ways, and the lover, the speaker, has lost the beloved, but the lover will not let go. I will hold on to the ghost, you know. So proving himself sort of better than his parents. So there is that lovely, wonderful sort of like insight in the piece that we improve on the previous generation, and we believe in love even if our parents stop believing in it. And then the basic problem is really I think just the words that are too abstract. I mean, understatement is your strategy, and then you're gonna top it with some abstraction too much, you know. And you will write more, and then you will move towards more specificity, hopefully. It doesn't have to be just toads in your imaginary garden. You can have lovely things like flowers and butterflies. So a snake would do probably penises, right? An imaginary garden with real penises.
Okay. Let's hear from Thomas.
Wala si Shane.
Ay, wala siyang sharing video.
No, she has finals.
Okay.
Sorry.
Na-miss ko siya.
But she will, we still have a few days. Just when she sends it, we'll probably have a private viewing for Tom.
Send it to everyone.
So first off, I'm really grateful for the comments. Actually, just want to talk about the conversation I had with Nico. Because generally, my problem when revising poems, generally in revising any poem, is I already kind of have a feel with what's wrong because I'm never quite happy with any of my poems. But I need to have people discuss my poems or talk about it in different ways for it to solidify. And that's one thing I had. One problem I saw, it's I like being concrete, but it doesn't solidify on the page itself at times. So I'm really happy for these kinds of comments because now it's starting to take form of what I can do. And I'm probably just going to answer your question in gestures. Here's just something I've learned to do because generally, even as a person, when I explain stuff, I tend to be very gestural. There's just probably something that carried into my poetry. The thing about plays, it's really interesting the discussion on remembering the farm because I appreciate the comments on plays because I'm also trying to see how I can texture it even if I don't directly talk about the plays. But remembering the farm is more of a reimagination of my dad's divorce with his first wife overseas. And it's not so much my point of view on it, but I'm trying to reimagine how my siblings would have done it. So I'm actually considering how as a project, I'm able to capture this sort of, how do we imagine things in lands that we don't even, we've never been in, through the experience of people that are connected to you, but they're still different. So that's what I was trying to go for. And it's almost exactly like the narrative told by Sir John. Because that's how I imagined her divorce. When there was a house, there was fighting over it, there was lots of money that none of it's going back to us apparently. Even though we have like half of it dapat. And generally, I mean, there's really not much for me to say because all of the comments make a lot of sense in my head with the voice that's trying to see how I can improve on the paper, and that's really just it.
Okay. We transition to the next poet, susunod na makata. Si Michael. Tama ba? 5-minute break kasi. Okay then.
In our poem though, the surviving lover moves through and will weather alone, it seems, the storms in his life, as though to say, I am the captain of my soul. This is not to say, I don't mean that the captain's memoir has already sparkled in its current form. I'm always saying there's a potential there that the author might like to think about. My notes for remembering the farm is long, but let me try to shorten it here. From the get-go, in the first and second stanzas, the poem already raises suspicion in terms of credibility, and credibility is what we need as a writer who makes the speaker in a poem, only because we have to draw in the reader and take the reader where we want him or her to go, and so the reader has to trust us. The description in the first stanza makes me wonder about the farm, like how large it is, if there are oranges and apples and pears and other fruits. Also, the time when the poem is happening is also confusing. Oranges and apples, for instance, are of different seasons. Oranges in the summer, apples in the fall. Because the poem uses the word fall, it should be capital F, by the way. It uses fall and not autumn. We can assume the setting is not in the Philippines and not in Europe. How does this play in understanding the poem or in appreciating the poem? Also, do you need to mention, how badly do you need to have a tuning in that poem? In the third stanza, the words smashed plates and shattered glass imply a degree of violence which diminishes the teacups because the teacups are merely chipped. This poem, Remembering the Farm, is also rather top-heavy. In other words, the first stanza seemed to have more attention from the writer. If the plan were to indirectly tell about the conflict, about the family, through the descriptions of the farmhouse, I feel as a reader still left in the dark, which again, by the author, I feel might need to be a little more brave in giving more details. Try shifting the weight of the attention of in giving details towards the latter part of the piece. I feel there's something there in the fifth stanza. In the moment, though, it's too repressed. In an orchestra of country ghosts, the tone of the speaker carries the point. The form shows a double suppression, suppressed thoughts, but also a double telling. I find the form well, showing a thought folded within a thought, a whisper within a whisper. Also, the idea of ghosts as enduring presence or trace definitely works in this poem. The orchestra of tremors starts strong, picks up in the fourth stanza. There's a beautiful line there, but loses steam in the fifth stanza. The form in Departure is an example of what I mentioned as a possibility of dropping punctuation marks to give a sense of fluidity and using capitalizations as a mark or a signal for a group of ideas. This is also an example, this piece, of how a writer can manipulate, literally, the body of a reader, forcing the reader's eyes to move to a certain direction constantly and using this movement as part of experiencing the poem. You notice the sudden resting of the eyes back from the far left, from the far right to the far left margin for the final cut. The title is a little heavy-handed, like saying the obvious. Is a poem truly about departure, or is it about having to leave someone or being left behind? In A Story of a Boat, I feel the poem wants to immediately operate on a metaphorical level. I'm not sure it's the best idea to do so. The form gives a sense of being in disarray and indecisive. Finally, I find the poem For Sale, A House Newly Built, as a poem about being inside the process of mourning and mourning grief. It's a tough theme because it's supposed to hurt for real the body of the reader. The reader has to almost literally experience it. We cry, we hold our breath. To write a piece on mourning and going through and surviving grief, I feel as an author, one has to go into that experience, vicarious or otherwise, down the deep well of vulnerability and grief so inconsolable you drown on dry land. At least to me, that is when one writes a poem on mourning. So this collection, A Question of Memory, sets up some demands from the author.
Taking a break, Neil.
But that was a break.
Pero may 35 pa sa ano eh.
So we're waiting for Miranda sa
Yes.
So
yeah, we'll wait for Brianna.
3:30 po yung next session. So, rest and take a break lang. Then, snacks will be brought here in 10 minutes. Thank you. Sorry po na delay yung kitchen.
We apologize for the
Or probably